I'm Curtis Knight, host of the Fishwater People podcast, and today we're talking about California's cycles of drought and deluge and how climate change is affecting these cycles and our future water supplies, why it's important to invest in nature-based solutions, including meadow restoration and groundwater storage, to combat the impacts of drought and climate change. We also discuss how crucial California's water rights are, a topic that will impact us all, and we explore why California is so far behind other states and how we regulate water. This is timely, especially with our work in Sacramento, with water rights front and center during this legislative cycle, including AB 460, a bill that CalTrout is co-sponsoring. In this episode, we'll check in with CalTrout's Associate Director of Policy, Analise Rivero, for a policy update, and we'll hear from our very own Craig Ballinger for some wit and wisdom from an angler. But first, let's get started with our featured guest, Felicia Marcus. She's the William C. Landreth Visiting Fellow at Stanford University's Water in the West program. She's also an attorney, a consultant, and a founding member of the Water Policy Group, and a fellow at the National Academy of Public Administration, just to name some of her roles. So needless to say, she knows water.
So I spent a lot of time mentoring students, but also helping faculty run their ideas past me to see how it would really work in the real world. It's a wonderful opportunity for me to retool, but also to try and help people ground the work that they're doing, their good intentions, with what might actually have an impact in the world. And so it's been an eye-opener and really fun. And then, part of it is these uncommon dialogues where we bring in people from across a spectrum to converse and think about an issue that they wouldn't otherwise be brought together to think about.
Right. Well, and how fun for you too. I mean, given, you're chairing the State Water Board, you're working for the EPA at a very high level on the federal side, president of the City of Los Angeles Board of Public Works. I mean, that is quite an impressive resume.
That was the biggest job I'll ever have. I've been sort of doing a Benjamin Button kind of a career.
What a stadium you get to work in now, just to be able to act on what interests you out there and really be able to think about it deeply. It's that must be really satisfying.
Well, it's great at this age and I'm not exactly an elder, but it's great to be able to take this broad sort of general expertise I have in connecting engineers and other technical people with the real world and with community groups and tribes and all of that, to have a position where I'm able to really just learn and think and do a lot of interviews and talk to people and try and find a way to make progress is really, it's empowering and exciting.
Yeah. We both live in this California water world, so a lot of overlap on the things that we're working on. I think foremost on a lot of people's minds, I know for us and our staff, it's climate change and what it's doing to our water here in California. And the last 20 collective years have been the driest in the last 1,200, the last 3, like the driest we've ever seen in consecutive years. And then breaking rainfall records that have been 100 years old or so. So, that whole idea of the dry getting drier, the wet getting wetter, kind of playing out as scientists predicted.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're seeing everything that we were told to expect in the next 20 or 30 years. It's just they're hitting us right now. So we shouldn't be surprised. The thing that's interesting about it, of course, is that, we've had 40 and 400-year droughts in the geophysical record, and we've probably had deluges. But and it's entirely possible that the last 100 years have been a relatively wet period for us. So the risks are enormous. And when you add climate change, which just exacerbates those tendencies, it really means we have to go to DEFCON 5 in preparing for both droughts and floods at the same time.
So play that out. Instead of stopping, we get 3, 4, 5 more atmospheric rivers. Not crazy. Could happen. What happens to our water system?
Well, it's an interesting question, because if you space them out well enough, it'd be what the doctor ordered. I mean, what you'd ideally like is to have a series of them, maybe not
Right.
9 in a row like we had. I realize they now call them a parade of atmospheric rivers. That everybody called them. Everyone called them a parade, so it must be the right term.
Yeah, the parade. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
A
Or
bevy.
a bevy of atmospheric rivers. Yeah. Ideally, what you'd want to have them strung out over a period of time through the wet season so that the soils and everything had a chance to recover. Because ideally, it'd be awfully nice to be able to have those the storm surges that we need for natural systems, where you get the flushing and the cues to the ecosystem to do what the ecosystem wants to do, but you fill all of our reservoirs and you get it stretched out so that you had more of a shot of getting more of it into the ground as it goes by. Obviously, the way to really be able to do that is to go with nature-based solutions. If we did that big time, we would have a shot at capturing more of the high flows when they went by, so they'd have a chance to spread out and settle in and sink into the ground.
I mean, I think that's one of the things that we could talk a little bit about storage. I think when you talk to a lot of people about storage, you say storage, they think new reservoir, need a new reservoir here or there. But certainly groundwater storage, huge amounts of potential there. And then I think the other thing you're touching on is more the opportunity or the change that's really happening in the mountains, where our snowpack is not going to be the storage it once was, underscoring the importance of things like meadows and forestry management and those sorts of things.
Yeah, that's something I've been spending a lot of time on over the past, couple of years at Stanford, and the potential of dealing with that in a way that has multiple benefits for species and fire protection and climate protection, for lack of a better word, the prevention of those giant, oversized, catastrophic wildfires that release carbon plumes of enormous size into the atmosphere that are overtaking fossil fuels as the number one carbon emission source. You deal with that, and you also end up dealing with protecting water quality, because those fires also pack a punch when it comes to sedimentation and toxics running down into our reservoirs, stealing even more of our reservoir storage space. So you end up with just multiple wins through ecological forest restoration, not just taking out trees willy-nilly, and then meadow restoration on top of it is just extraordinary. We really have this amazing potential to, I don't want to say recontour the land, that's not the right phrase, but to actually sort of rediscover that which everybody knew up until about 100 years ago, and many places forgot in the zeal to do straight lines and engineered everything. And now we have to go back to what we once knew, and what a lot of people, particularly indigenous people, and a lot of people around the world still know, which is the connection between an entire watershed from top to bottom.
Yeah.
But it's true that the only thing that can approximate in size the snowpack that we're going to lose with a few degrees rise in temperature is our groundwater basins. Groundwater basins are so much bigger than any reservoirs we could ever build, and we built them in all the prime spots already.
And just to fill in our listeners, California's Department of Water Resources estimates that the total storage capacity of our groundwater basins is somewhere between 850 million and 1.3 billion acre feet. Now compare that to the less than 50 million acre feet that can be stored in all of California's major reservoirs combined.
I think part of the challenge with nature-based solutions is that it's not as easy to just do a math formula. It's the multiple benefits don't have little buckets of budgets to pool with other benefits. So I think these are challenging to do unless you get big dollars from the state or the federal government. It's hard to do at a local level, but people are trying to do it because it just makes sense once they sit down and think about it. And so the opportunity to do things that are beneficial to people, surely, but also beneficial to the fish and wildlife and birds that we've left behind, so to speak, till now is really extraordinary.
Talk a little bit about, I've heard you talk about this before, but just the importance and the reliance that we have on our snowpack now, or maybe did 10 years ago especially, and how that's changing pretty rapidly.
Well, it's interesting. People tend to think about, getting back to your earlier point, people think of storage as just reservoirs and dams. Our single largest form of storage is our snowpack, which is fully a third of our storage in an average year. We have this variable hydrology where it doesn't snow every year, and it doesn't rain and snow in the places where it's most used, and it doesn't rain and snow even within a given year in the season when it's most used. And with a few degrees temperature change, we end up with more rain rather than snow. And that means we have more flooding in the spring, and we don't have that reserve to melt out slowly during the spring and the summer to replenish the reservoirs, replenish our streams, and refill our groundwater basins. Storage is essential for modern California to exist. You have this massive system of storage and conveyance that's wreaked significant havoc on the natural world, but has produced this economic and social miracles, which makes Central Valley agriculture as robust as it is, as important to California, the US, and the world as it is, but it also makes Southern California possible. We have big fights over whether there should be another dam, but the biggest ticket item is that snowpack and the timing benefit we get. You know, we need to be speeding our way towards things like meadow restoration, which, while not quite as perfect a time delay system as snow is, it does form a function of slowing and spreading the flow, which slowly over time makes its way back out into streams. And that timing delay is critically important.
Right. I mean, yeah, there's something like 90,000 acres of degraded meadows in the Sierra, and there's this huge opportunity to keep that storage up high by restoring these meadows. And it's the classic example of multiple benefits, too. You get water storage, you get a meadow restored, you get biodiversity, species diversity there. And then,
right,
there's been work that we've been doing with others in that Sierra Meadows partnership on the potential for carbon sequestration and greenhouse gas retention in restored meadows compared to degraded meadows. Wildfire buffers. I mean,
I know, it's a gift that keeps on giving. These things have this incredible value of redemption and restoration for people as well, in a way that is really important. And if we start being more precise in our water use in the urban and agricultural arena, and more precise in our capture of water when we can get it, and our use not just of what we can build with concrete and steel, but what we can build through this restoration of nature-based solutions and working with nature to do what nature does, we can handle what's coming at us. At least in California, we have a shot at handling drought and capturing water off into the future. I see great hope in that. It's a long way to get it all done, but it's pretty impressive visioning. We're ahead on many things, climate regulation and water quality regulation, but when it comes to managing water generally, we're behind the Western states.
Why? What's going on there? What's the major barrier that's holding that up? Is it politics? Is it just the, I know our agricultural system in the Central Valley is so important to the food supply to the rest of the state. Huge part of what California is part of it just that massive machine being hard to change?
Yes, politics for sure. And two, the resistance to change that you find in any sort of entrenched system, and that resistance to change isn't just about convenience, it's about fear and communities that are dependent on it. I also think part of the challenge we have in California, which is stronger than in many other places, and this is somewhat inexplicable, is the fact that we don't have a fully built out water rights system or water management system the way virtually every other state deals with this precious a resource. We have 3 different systems plopped on top of each other, 4 actually, if you count groundwater. They're not quantified. We haven't required everyone to quantify it. It's not paper. There's a current effort to try and digitize what information we do have, so you actually can lay a foundation for conversation. But the Water Board in particular has been understaffed from day one to be able to implement the system that we do have. Some improvements in the Brown administration, to be sure, and some improvements currently in the Newsom administration, where they understand the need to modernize the system. But we need to do it much bigger time, because right now people think their water rights are what their grandparents told them they were.
Right.
And that's not always right. And there's no capacity to judge it and have everybody able to see it in a transparent way. So it's harder to manage the system in a more precise way, particularly when people think that their water rights are much bigger than they really probably are, because it hasn't been the term, if you're being really serious about it, is adjudicated, where you assess each other's rights against each other, or even just quantifying it without adjudicating it the way Colorado has, down to the molecule practically.
Nothing like a drought, a 3-4 year period of really dry weather to put the spotlight on how inefficient, unfair our system is for how we use water. So the water rights system is going to have to be overhauled. Hard to think about a bigger shakeup than that in California. When you say that to somebody, whoever they are going to go, whoa, wow. You're listening to the Fishwater People podcast by California Trout, a nonprofit organization founded in 1971 to ensure healthy waters and resilient wild fish for a better California. To find out more about the work California Trout is doing across the state, or to become a member, visit caltrout.org. That's CalTrout.org. One of the things that you're doing at Stanford, this idea of uncommon dialogues that you've participated in there, and that idea of there's laws on the books and there's actually what happens out there on the ground. They don't always match. And I think one vision is, well, what if they did? What if the way we manage water was the way it's written on paper?
That would be better than the way it is right now.
Yeah.
I mean, when you were talking about the water rights, I was thinking, there's sort of two levels. One is I'd settle for the one we have working as a starter. That would be an improvement. And then the second question is the history of how it evolved and who got left behind. But yeah, right now I'm working on this interesting project where we're bringing together folks from around the state and actually a number of people from other states to talk about the tools that we have on the books, whether it's public trust doctrine or waste and unreasonable use, or there's a provision in the Fish and Game Code 5937 that said that all dam operators had to build the dam, they had to promise to leave fish in good condition below the dam. And as far as I know, nobody has, and it hasn't been enforced.
Yeah. And what's good condition mean?
Yeah, what does it mean? No, don't complicate it even further. But you're right. But It's interesting and there are a series of these, and it's interesting. Paul Keibel wrote a really nice book called River Flow. I have it sitting right here, actually.
Yeah, I read your foreword there.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Thanks.
I did a little research here, getting ready for this, just a little.
I'm pretty impressed, really. But his thesis is that we have all these tools on the books to protect in-stream flows for a variety of uses, fish and wildlife, water quality, you name it, and that the real problem is a lack of political will for the reasons we were talking before. And I agreed in the foreword that political will is really the dominant factor. But my project is saying, well, let's figure out if there are barriers to using them other than political will. Because, I had the political will behind me to do a lot of this when I was at the state board, and we were only able to do a fraction of what we wanted to do because it was just so darn hard. And some of that is process, and some of that is, when you're an agency, you don't get to wave a magic wand to do what a statute said. You have certain tools and rules and processes, some of which can be gamed, some of which require staff that you never had in order to do, some that just take a long time to implement. And so we'll come together for a day and brainstorm a bit about what those barriers are and whether there are things we could do to at least remove the barriers to implementing the rules we have on the books when we do have the political will, which, is less glamorous than dealing in politics, but I think it has a lot of value. I tend to really like these projects in general that focus on that, again, what I call the high value, low glamour work that it takes to really get things done. And so maybe we'll be able to identify a project or a breakthrough or a tool that can at least make some of these more usable when you do have folks who want to use them. It's very frustrating when you're trying to actually do something. You have the support of administration to do it and you still can't get it done. One of the challenges we have is even in Sacramento, you have a lot of people who talk theory as if you could wave a magic wand and do, or somebody oughta, my favorite Yogi Berra quote is, in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is.
Right. This idea where you're working in the Sacramento state policy world and you see something, it's like, yeah, this is just an obvious thing we need to do. Fish and Game Code 5937. If you have a barrier, you need to leave fish in good condition. So
Yeah.
what's going on? Let's make everybody do that. And then you actually get out there on the ground and realize how it's tricky. It's tricky to work with private landowners to change. You have to build up trust, sometimes find incentives, but also at times, I think you got to push things along. And you're an attorney. The law can help do that at times.
Right. Yeah, it's really important. It's interesting how some places folks will talk about litigation as if it's a dirty word, even when they file litigation. It's a funny double-edged sword. But yeah, the law sometimes needs a little help to be enforced, and it helps give a little bit of the political will where you don't have the political will, and sometimes it just creates this balance where we can move forward. But they're not always easy to use. Some laws do have what are known as citizen suit provisions, where when the government doesn't do the enforcing, the public sector, private individuals and groups can do it. And I think that's one of the places where California has excelled and made real progress. But other statutes don't have the same tools in it that are important. Other statutes have so much process that it becomes so expensive that nobody can do it.
Right. Well, and the Water Board taking action this past drought cycle with curtailments at seemed like a much higher level than they had in the past as a tool that seemed necessary at the time. We also saw, though, out in the Shasta Valley, where we work a lot with landowners, where the fine associated with not abiding by the curtailment was relatively low, which decision was made to, well, we're going to violate that, take the fine, relatively small hit, and grab the water there. How do you reconcile something like that? Is that just a loophole that we need to fix in the water right enforcement world?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a need for much tougher enforcement penalties that are easier, and enforcement tools that are easier to use, and enough people to be able to be eyes and ears out in the field and able to take those enforcement actions. I mean, I think in many regards, as with any set of rules and laws, the vast majority of compliance is because people want to comply with the law. We don't have eco cops, or we don't have cops who can do everything. I mean, we don't have enough cops to catch everybody who speeds, right? But you need to have enough of them that you can deter the people who aren't deterred by the morality of this agreed upon social order, because our enforcement, our rules are sort of our social contract with each other. And if we don't have that, we have anarchy, right? But in certain situations, such as folks saying my crop or my cows are going to die if I don't get water, so I have to do it, or I'm going to do it, and they're not thinking about the fish or the tribes or the people downstream in the panic of the moment, you actually do need some tougher tools to put a little more weight on the scales of that decision making out in the world. And I have to say, having tried to implement the water rights system, you feel as if you've got weights on both hands, and your ankles are tied together, and you're wearing really dark sunglasses. You can't. It's just we're expecting a system to work when we haven't given it the tools that it needs.
Analise.
Hello.
Thanks on short notice here. It was a great discussion. We thought that it would be good to check in with one of CalTrout's amazing staff people who really focuses on this work down in Sacramento. We're joined by Analise Rivero. So Analise, thanks for joining.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm CalTrout's Associate Director of Policy. I'm based here in Sacramento. I am a registered lobbyist, and so this means I focus on all things related to legislation, agency policy, any regulatory movements, and also importantly, state budget, and make sure that CalTrout's interests are well represented in all of those things.
Right. So important to be there, have a presence in our state capital. So much happens out there as far as funding for the work that we do, state funding for the work that we do, but also water and water policies. I mean, talk about AB 460.
Yes. CalTrout, along with Trout Unlimited and the Planning and Conservation League, PCL, we are co-sponsoring a bill called AB 460 with Assemblymember Rebecca Bauer-Cahan. And she is the chair of the Assembly Water Parks and Wildlife Committee. So it's fantastic. We have the chair advocating for this important issue. And AB 460 was born out of a situation that occurred last fall up in the Shasta region, where the State Water Board had been kind of giving some warning signs to local water users and particularly a group of ranchers to say that, hey, water levels aren't looking great. This may come to a curtailment situation. So there was no surprise there per se. And then the day came where the water board had to officially issue curtailment orders because the water levels had dropped. And this group of individuals essentially said, no, we're not doing that. And they were very public about it too. This wasn't something secret. It was posted on their association's newsletter and Facebook, and very openly discussing that, we're going to continue pumping. And what ended up happening was, in the span of about 8 days, these folks took out over half the water from the river, obviously illegally, an illegal diversion at that point. And when all was said and done, the water board was only able to issue fines that amounted to about $50 per rancher. And that sent up huge alarm bells, obviously, at CalTrout and many, many other groups. This got picked up by the Sacramento Bee, the Guardian, lots of press coverage over the issue with the impacts not only to freshwater species, but there was also a major expose on how this impacted tribal interests, particularly the Karuk. So there were just a lot of implications of what happened. And at $50 per person, that's unfortunately just so easily folded into cost of doing business. So the community at large who was concerned about this situation was like, okay, is this something that the water board can change themselves through a regulatory process to perhaps increase those fees to actually be, a deterrent? Or is that something that has to happen through the legislature? And through our various discussions and research, it became very clear that it had to be done through the legislature. CalTrout really did some spearheading of talking about this issue and, bringing examples of all the press coverage and et cetera, to different legislative offices. And people really got it. I mean, even folks who aren't steeped into the water world immediately were like, woo, this is concerning.
Yeah.
So that's how we ended up with a great author, Howard Tehan, and hopefully, crafting this bill to help address more bad actors. And, we're hopeful that this will, be a very logical, common sense kind of bill, because especially when you're looking at illegal water diversions in the headwaters, that impacts water rights and water users downstream too, who do follow curtailment orders and are good actors.
Right.
So we're really hoping that this makes sense to a lot of folks of, again, just helping to continue to enforce existing laws.
Yeah, that's a great point about supporting other water users should be supportive of something like this, because if you have bad actors out there, it certainly compromises the whole system and others that are using that water.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for taking a few minutes out of your busy day there in Sacramento, and I'll let you get back to it.
Of course. Thank you so much. It's always exciting here and always happy to fill you all in.
As we start to wind down, let's ramp up a little bit with Felicia. I think I know the answer to this, but I want to know if you're an optimist or a pessimist. I'm pretty sure you're an optimist, but
I am very much an optimist. I mean, it's the only way to live, really. If you
it's the only way.
It is, because otherwise you just want to stay under the covers all day. Well, if you work it, I've had a few good wins in my career. I used to say if I had one good win every 10 years, it would keep me flailing away. And I think I've done okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk a little bit about specifically this state. And I do go back to the people that are here and sort of the innovation and the leadership that we have been able to provide on so many fronts to being able to take on this climate change, especially what it means for, I think Erica Geis in her book too also said the climate crisis in California translates to a water crisis. I think that is the primary impact that we're going to see. Rising sea levels, coastal communities, drought, flooding, these sorts of things are going to be bigger issues.
Yes.
What gives you optimism for this state to be able to take on these big changes we're going to see with the climate crisis translating to a water crisis?
Well, I will temper that by saying that I wish we were doing as well on water as we are on climate generally, because water is more fraught politically for whatever reason, some of the reasons we talked about. I think water is way behind in terms of the discourse that we have. I love people in the water world from agriculture, urban, environmental justice, environmental, tribal. They're great people, but we tend to talk past each other more than engage with each other. And I think that's just historical cultural norm that keeps us from meeting our potential as quickly as we can. But what gives me hope is work like CalTrout is doing. It actually fills me with joy to see it. And this movement towards nature-based solutions getting traction in the Central Valley floodplain, and the incredible work happening on the ground in Southern California to adapt to climate change with the two largest recycled water projects in the world just fills me with optimism and hope. And then if you add to that, the voters in LA County, which is much bigger than LA City, I would say almost twice as big as LA City, and this includes LA City, passed a measure a few years ago to raise a fee that's giving them $300 million a year to do multi-benefit, nature-based stormwater capture, urban greening, stormwater capture, both for cleaning before it goes out to sea, but also for groundwater recharge and flood control.
Right.
And it's, it takes a while to get started, but in the course of the next decade, you're going to see the face of LA County change with far more of these sort of restored urban wetlands and greenways that are also going to do multiple benefits. And so I really think of Southern California as the epicenter of climate adaptation in a water scarce urban region. The other thing that gives me hope is right in the Bay Area, where it would be the analog where 9 Bay Area counties and their voters passed a measure to raise $500 million to use terraced wetlands to buffer sea level rise rather than having a war of seawalls. That's amazing.
It's under the radar too.
And it's really important to watch. And there's some really exciting things happening in New York to do something similar based on their terrain. And so I'm starting to see some very large scale awareness of the fact that we can use nature to help solve our problems, and we can use water more efficiently and precisely and maintain our quality of life, if not better our quality of life. And so that stuff all gives me hope, even as certain things like fights over fish in the Bay Delta, just make my heart sink.
We start acting in the right direction or we don't. But this is sort of the decade to do it.
No, we either go for it or we go to Mad Max, right. Pretty much. So I say go for it. Yeah.
I can see you in Mad Max, though. We need to get you a nice vehicle and just start ripping around out there and taking charge, Felicia. I like that idea.
That's right.
Well, is there anything else you want to say? Top of mind?
No, just I'm glad you asked that question. I do think it's important to be optimistic to keep you going. And there, even as there are things that are frustrating, and there's plenty of frustrating things happening right now. I mean, the fact is we have the potential to meet this crisis. I mean, clearly the number one is to not just limit our use of fossil fuels, which has been the focus for the past 20 years, and certainly not to abandon it, but also to double down on natural systems. Because unless we deal with land-based emissions from deforestation and these conflagrations of our own making, we're toast. And so the beauty is that dealing with it can yield all these multiple benefits that we've been talking about. And that gets me really excited, even as I'm perfectly clear-eyed about how complicated it is to work across silos of jurisdiction and profession and type of even landscape. But it's something I think we're capable of doing with a meeting of leadership from on-the-ground leadership, which I think in many places is stronger than the higher levels of government. And that we take, for example, the billions of dollars in the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act and spend it really wisely, because it gives us a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to steer the course in a different direction. The challenge is always human, but I think people are generally good. I mean, not everybody agrees, but you need to set the table and create the opportunity for folks to really listen to each other, which is hard to do. And so it's a real honor to be able to help set that table.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up. I think that is going to be really important dialogue for us in the water world to continue to underscore that there are all these things as a society we need to do, but let's not forget we can't have these ecosystems unraveling or we're not going to get there. It's perfect for you. I mean, you have the experience, you've seen it all in so many different areas, and then you have the influence.
No, I love it. I'm glad people keep listening to me. It's really wonderful. I love when folks call and say, "What do you think about this?" And I'm like, "Oh, good. They're still asking me. Good. Yay."
Well, this right here is why people listen, because you get so much good information and perspective on this crazy California water world that we live in, I feel like we could talk for hours and hours, but I just want to thank you for taking the time out of your morning, just got started early here, to talk fish, water, and people.
Thank you. My 3 favorite topics.
I really could keep talking for hours about fish, water, and people. There's so much to learn, and the water world is constantly shifting here in California. Personally, I find no end how fascinating it all is, and I'm always trying to learn more. I tend to have multiple books going at the same time, I think because I have a short attention span, but a couple of good ones right now. California Burning by Catherine Blunt, about the rise and fall of PG&E, is fascinating. Talking about everything from the early days of hydropower development here in California to the bankruptcy of PG&E. It's a fascinating read and very current for the times. I've also been really interested in this book called The Ministry for the Future, written by Kim Stanley Robinson, who lives in Davis, California here, and it's climate fiction. So if you're into that kind of thing, it's fascinating tale of some terrifying things in the near future, but also ending on a lot of hope. So definitely those 2 are worth checking out. And now let's jump in with a little wit and wisdom from our very own Craig Ballinger.
Well, Curtis, we can't ever forget Mother Nature bats last. We've been through so many decades of drought, and then all of a sudden, blam, we were inundated with this tremendous amount of water this year, and then all of a sudden, and now I'm reading from the press on a national level that we have so much water in California, it's being wasted. There's nothing to be done with it. I think it was from NPR or somebody that said, there's so much water in California. Why is it all going to waste? I thought that was a good one for today. Who's to say that water's going to waste? Water's kind of eternal, you know?
There's a water cycle.
Yeah. What do you mean going to waste? Where that leads in the future as this season unfolds with all this water is a fairly unique circumstance for which the state of California, with all its levees and reservoirs, has had no plan for. No way to store or utilize that water, or in some cases, even to reintroduce it to the aquifer. This is all tied together with this Mother Nature bats last, and that we find ourselves ill-prepared for the amount of water that we have this year, and it's being wasted and going to the sea. Can I go now?
I think that's a good point when you think about Mother Nature batting last, when you think about it in the context of water in California. You're touching on this too, is that we don't know what we're going to get in a given year. California has some of the most variable rainfall, precipitation amounts of anywhere in the lower 48. It's here in California. So from year to year, we never know what we're going to get. So in a lot of ways, that sets the stage for the year ahead, whether it's a wet year, dry year, normal year, and that variability seems to be increasing. We've saw the last 3 years were the driest 3 years ever recorded, and now we're breaking precipitation records this year. So it definitely not up to us about what kind of water year we're going to have. It is up to us on how we manage it and what we do with it. That's sort of the arena we play in. I'm Curtis Knight, Executive Director at CalTrout and your host of the Fish, Water, People podcast. Thanks so much to Felicia Marcus, Analise Rivero, and Craig Ballinger for making this episode possible, and many, many thanks to Wilco for our theme music. This episode was produced, edited, and engineered by Drew Alvarez and Bridget Shaw of Pusher Inc. and recorded at the Trout Camp Studio along the Upper Sacramento River in Dunsmuir, California. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you on the water.